Hey heroes, and welcome to another insidious episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute and vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for an amount of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelite. The link is in the description below along with other places you can find me. Arnim Zola was born sometime around 1908 in his ancestral castle in the Swiss Alps, although on at least one occasion he has been misidentified as being Austrian. The son of a nobleman who espoused the benefits of a strong, healthy body, Zola was a diminutive fellow with handbooks listing him as originally being 3 foot 3 inches in height. Little is known of his childhood and upbringing aside from the fact that he was a student of the renowned Polish geneticist Władysław Shinsky. If that name sounds familiar, it's because Shinsky was one of the founders of the Enclave that later created Adam Warlock. Arnim Zola, meanwhile, was a genius ahead of his time in the field of biochemistry and genetics. He believed that science held the key to perfecting the human form, but he was also a man who was unburdened by morality. By 1929, he'd begun a series of twisted experiments, capturing humans and animals and grafting them together into bizarre chimeras, attempting to learn what he could from each one in his ongoing quest to uncover the secrets of biology. For example, in one instance, he successfully grafted the head of a servant woman onto the body of her Doberman, although the resulting creature was in constant pain. But then, in the 1930s, he came upon a mysterious iron box hidden beneath the stone floor of his ancestral home. Inside, he discovered ancient documents that his forebears had recovered from the Near East during the Crusades. Successfully decoding these papers, Zola found them to be scientific notes containing information on DNA and genetics that was far beyond human science of the time. In truth, those documents were originally written by the Deviants, an ancient offshoot of humanity who had been performing their own genetic research for thousands of years. As Zola deciphered the secrets in the Deviant papers, he refocused his experiments with the goal of creating new forms of life from scratch. His first success was relatively small, a simple tentacled creature, but it was a success nonetheless. He had artificially created life. Things proceeded from there, with Zola using cells cloned from his own brain to grow even larger creatures, although he terminated these for his own safety when some grew too violent to control. Seeking financial support to continue his work after the outbreak of the Second World War, Zola moved from Switzerland to Germany, where he offered his scientific services to Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. The details of his exploits during the war have not been comprehensively documented, but it's likely that he contributed to the development of multiple superhuman operatives. There is some evidence to suggest that he first tried producing genetic clones of Hitler as early as June of 1941, but these initial copies were unreliable due to their erratic behavior and a lack of intellect. One such clone was evidently shot and killed by a middle-aged American adventurer named Ward Stocker, who was mistakenly convinced that he'd assassinated the real Adolf Hitler, and that the one who carried on in his place was a body double. In 1942, when 4 of the Allied forces' Invaders were captured by the Nazis, Zola used them in an experiment to temporarily endow a prototype Ubermensch with the combined powers of Captain America, Namor, the Human Torch, and Toro the Flame Kid. However, this new super soldier lacked the ability to properly control these powers, and when the young ally Bucky Burns successfully freed his fellow invaders, the Ubermensch was quickly defeated as his limited energy ran out. Other Nazi agents that Zola may or may not have been involved in the creation of include the Sculpture, an animated statue who clashed with the destroyer Roger Aubrey, the Shark Man, a Nazi who at Hitler's command was mutated into a monstrous amphibious form to battle the Submariner, and the Corpse, a Nazi spy who was caught and killed by firing squad, but whose brain continued functioning even after his heart and lungs stopped, allowing him to subsequently reanimate. Meanwhile, Zola's experiments caught the attention of an Inhuman named Fader and his half-deviant son, Maelstrom. For those unaware, the Inhumans are another offshoot of humanity who isolated themselves from the rest of the world for much of recorded history. In the distant past, an Inhuman king named Randak discovered that his people possessed the capacity to gain superhuman powers when exposed to a substance called Terrigen Mist. However, a considerable number of them suffered terrible side effects, including monstrous mutation and significantly reduced mental faculties. As a result, their race took a vested interest in the study of genetics, with those who wished to undergo terrigenesis being subjected to rigorous screening first. A 12-member genetic council was formed to map lineages, prescribe marriages, and regulate breeding, with those whose genes were deemed superior, i.e. more likely to produce positive results via terrigenesis, being given more favorable positions in society. I could probably do a whole video on Inhuman society, but for now the relevant point is that eventually an Inhuman named Fader began performing cloning experiments that had been forbidden by the Genetic Council. After making a bid for leadership of the council and losing to his rival Aegon, the father of Black Bolt, Fader used his illegal cloning technology to fake his death and fled the Inhuman city to continue his research elsewhere. He also decided to pass on notes containing the secrets of DNA to several human geneticists who were both capable of understanding them and morally flexible enough to use them. This included the aforementioned Władysław Shinsky, Herbert Edgar Wyndham, and of course Arnim Zola. Oh, and if Herbert Wyndham sounds familiar, you may know him better by his later nom de guerre, the High Evolutionary. Anyway, between information gleaned from the Deviants, the Inhumans, and his own research, Arnim Zola became one of the first humans in modern history to master the secrets of genetic engineering. By 1945, he'd perfected his greatest accomplishment, a device capable of completely transferring a person's consciousness, memories, and personality from their original brain into a cloned one. And while others thought him mad, Adolf Hitler took a keen interest in Zola's technology. In fact, the Fuhrer submitted himself to a procedure that energized his brain, allowing him to undergo the transfer process remotely. Another of Zola's creations was an incurable virus, which he tested on the inhabitants of an isolated Dutch town in January of 1945. Those infected were transformed on a molecular level, becoming misshapen, aggressive, and in constant pain, while lacking the ability for conscious thought. In effect, these victims were changed into living weapons whose only purpose was to attack others and to spread the virus. An outbreak was prevented by the invaders, who were forced to destroy the town and everyone in it to stop it from spreading. This was obviously not an easy decision for them to make, although the townsfolk who had been infected but not yet transformed all volunteered to be euthanized. In the midst of this battle, Zola himself was tracked down by two heroes, the Vision and the Human Torch. As a side note, this Vision is not the android that you may be thinking of, but a law keeper from the Dimension of Smoke named Arcus. The Torch, of course, was the original android Jim Hammond, who we've talked about on the channel before. In any event, suffice it to say that Zola's encounter with the two heroes didn't go well for him. He pulled a laser gun and fired, but the Human Torch fired back, destroying the weapon, which exploded in his hand, seemingly killing him. Of course, Arnim Zola was unafraid of his own death, having already prepared a backup plan. While the Human Torch destroyed the lab along with any chance of recreating the virus, Zola's body was recovered by the armored Nazi agent, the Iron Cross, and placed in a waiting brain transfer machine. While Zola's new body was presumably cloned from his own cells, it was also genetically engineered to be larger and stronger. More noticeably, it was designed to function without a traditional head, as his cloned brain was contained within his new body's chest cavity to keep it better protected. He adorned this new form with a special armored suit, including an electronic harness that projected a three-dimensional visage based on his original face. In place of a head, it was equipped with a device called an ESP box, which converted telepathic signals into sensory input, allowing allowing him to perceive his surroundings. This also gave him the power to telepathically control his genetic creations, as they were also engineered using his own DNA as a basis. Meanwhile, the war's final days were fast approaching, and one of Hitler's most infamous agents, the Red Skull, predicted that Germany's defeat was inevitable. Seeking allies to plan for the future, he met with Arnim Zola, who provided the Skull with an experimental serum that would place him into suspended animation if the need ever arose. The two also conspired with the disgraced Baron Wolfgang von Strucker, who was in the midst of usurping control of the ancient secret society known as Hydra, at the time based in Japan. Now, I will note that some other sources indicate that the life-preserving gas that the Skull received actually came from Strucker and not Zola. In either case, Zola was still loyal to Hitler, but agreed to join Strucker and the Red Skull in the future to help Hydra accomplish what the Third Reich could not. Of course, things soon came to a head during the Battle of Berlin in April of 1945. In a hidden bunker deep beneath the city, the Red Skull faced off against his greatest enemy, Captain America. Eventually, the bombing above caused the bunker to collapse, and while Captain America escaped, the Skull was trapped beneath the rubble and forced to use Zola's gas to survive. That same month, the Human Torch and his partner Toro were sent on a mission to capture Adolf Hitler alive. They successfully infiltrated his underground bunker, but when the Fuhrer threatened to destroy the entire city, the Torch was forced to use his deadly flame to stop him. Of course, the Allies had no way of knowing that at the exact moment of his death, Hitler's mind was projected from his original body into a cloned copy prepared by Arnim Zola. To conceal his identity, Hitler donned a purple Klan hood and became known as the Hate-Monger. Over the following years, with Zola's assistance, Adolf Hitler transferred his mind from one cloned body to another, eventually gaining the ability to do so virtually at will. After the war, Zola also created a number of other bioforms, including Doughboy, a massive putty-like creature with a malleable body that could alter its shape at will. From that same substance, he also made Primus, an intelligent humanoid bioform with superhuman strength and the ability to harden its skin into a rock-like density. I will note that Primus's body was also very malleable, but not quite to the degree of Doughboy's. Doughboy was even capable of transforming into a flying saucer that Zola could use as a transport. He also made more animalistic creations like the Man-Fish, who went on to menace the small nation of Rio de Muerte. Given the number of monster attacks in the 1950s and early 1960s, it's possible that Zola is also responsible for some of the unexplained incidents from that era, but this is basically just speculation. The specifics of his post-war activities are largely undocumented, but he eventually made good on his promise to reunite with Baron Strucker and aided Hydra early in the Marvel Age. Using stolen life model decoy technology, Zola created an android called the Deltite, whose brain patterns were based on those of Strucker himself. The Deltite was smuggled into S.H.I.E.L.D. and hidden among the other LMDs to effectively serve as a Hydra sleeper agent. That eventually led to a conspiracy in which the Deltite replaced members of the S.H.I.E.L.D. Executive Council with similarly sophisticated LMDs, but perhaps that's a story for another day. If you want to read that one for yourselves, you can check out the 1988 miniseries Nick Fury vs. S.H.I.E.L.D. According to one source, Arnim Zola also provided Strucker with a fake alien queen, but this has been contested. The implication here is that the Nobians, an alien race that visited the Earth as early as 1944, were actually an elaborate hoax perpetrated by Zola and Strucker, but that idea honestly raises more questions than it answers and has basically been disregarded. But anyway, under the guise of the Hate-Monger, Hitler later resurfaced in the United States with an army of followers. Armed with a weapon called the H-ray that stimulated feelings of fear and anger in its targets, the Hate-Monger turned American citizens against each other by fomenting racism and xenophobia. His schemes were opposed by the Fantastic Four and then CIA agent Nick Fury, who tracked him to his base in the small South American nation of San Gusto. In the ensuing battle, Susan Storm invisibly ambushed the Hate-Monger, causing him to inadvertently turn his H-ray on his own followers, who then executed him in anger. Fury and the FF then unmasked the Hate-Monger and were shocked to see the unmistakable visage of Adolf Hitler. However, this was not the end of the former Fuhrer's mad ambitions, as he successfully transferred his mind into yet another cloned body. Meanwhile, Fury was tapped to become the new director of S.H.I.E.L.D. after his predecessor, Rick Stoner, was killed by Hydra. The Red Skull also eventually resurfaced after his body was recovered and revived by Advanced Idea Mechanics, or AIM, which at the time was also being controlled by Baron Strucker, effectively serving as a division of Hydra. If it seems like we're getting off track, it should be noted that Arnim Zola was lurking in the shadows and aiding Hydra during this time. However, things changed when Baron Strucker was killed during a final confrontation with Nick Fury. Zola had evidently prepared a way for him to be revived, but with his body left in a destroyed Hydra base at the bottom of the ocean, it would be years before he was recovered and resurrected. And in the meantime, Strucker's absence caused Hydra to splinter. Factions formed as various Hydra leaders attempted to seize control, and branches like AIM and the Secret Empire became wholly independent organizations. In the midst of all of this, Arnim Zola left Hydra and later allied himself with the Red Skull, who continued financing his further experiments. During this time, a number of Zola's genetic monstrosities were captured and documented by S.H.I.E.L.D. That situation eventually came to a head when Captain America encountered the Man-Fish in South America. Taking notice of this, Arnim Zola, now known as the Bio-Fanatic, couldn't resist revealing himself to his old enemy. With his creation Doughboy, Zola abducted Captain America and his new ally, a woman named Donna Maria Puentes, and brought them both back to his ancestral castle in Switzerland. Once there, his other creation, Primus, found himself attracted to this woman and wished to claim her for himself. When this led to insubordination, Zola forced Primus to merge with the larger Doughboy. After that, he was able to simply spawn 2 more bioforms from Doughboy's mass. While Captain America was held captive, Zola also presented his latest genetic android, Nazi X. Superhumanly strong but lacking the ability to speak, this experimental android served as another body to house Hitler's consciousness. According to Zola, Nazi X supposedly contained Adolf Hitler's original brain, which was removed and preserved after his death, although given what we know from multiple other sources, this account is dubious at best. In any event, this body was a temporary measure, as Zola ultimately planned to transplant its brain into Captain America's body. But while he was occupied with monologuing his plans at the hero, he neglected to pay attention to Donna Maria, who started a chemical fire in his lab. In the ensuing chaos, she and Cap grabbed more canisters of volatile chemicals and made sure that the fire spread throughout the entire fortress. As Castle Zola fell, Primus's consciousness supplanted Doughboy's, allowing him to seize control of their combined form and escape. Naturally, Zola also escaped and later reunited with the Hate-Monger, who was back in a traditional cloned body, and the Red Skull. Retreating to the Skull's Isle of Exiles, the Nazi trio then began scheming to create their own Cosmic Cube. For those unaware, cosmic cubes are incredibly powerful objects that are capable of reshaping reality itself based on the desires of those who hold them. Suffice it to say, they are not easy to make, requiring sentient energy from an adjacent dimension created by the Beyonders, but Advanced Idea Mechanics previously succeeded in creating one. However, that original cube was thought to have been destroyed after it was shattered by Captain Mar-Vell during an incident involving Thanos and the Avengers. And so in their quest to create a second one, the three Nazis abducted one of AIM's founders, Scientist Supreme George Clinton. Whereas AIM had MODOK to perform the delicate calculations needed to form the cube, the Nazis relied on a biocomputer powered by the brains of human prisoners. The said prisoners did not survive being connected to this machine for long, but of course their captors were unconcerned by this. Their efforts were opposed by an Israeli commando team who invaded the island, but this group was defeated and imprisoned. One of these commandos, a woman named Rachel, successfully made a desperate escape, choking a guard with a garrote made from her own hair. Little did she realize that her unlikely escape was made possible by the Hate-Monger himself, who plotted to betray the Red Skull and claim the cube's power for himself. While Zola succeeded in extracting information from Clinton's mind and completing the cube's outer casing, Rachel returned with a contingent of S.H.I.E.L.D. agents to launch a full-scale assault on the island. While the Red Skull was occupied dealing with that situation, Hitler slipped away and used his mind transfer technique to send his consciousness into the cube itself in an attempt to become a god. What the former Fuhrer failed to realize, however, is that the cube they made was incomplete and rendered non-functional when the skull interrupted the creation process. And so while Zola and the Red Skull escaped from the island before it was completely destroyed by S.H.I.E.L.D., Hitler's consciousness remained trapped in the powerless cube, which the skull then kept as a souvenir. Now that cosmic cube was later stolen by a cult of neo-Nazis who wanted to activate it and awaken the Hate-Monger, but perhaps we'll talk more about that another day. In the meantime, Zola's organic creation, Primus, resurfaced and joined forces with another Nazi, Baron Zemo, whose father also served Hitler during the Second World War. By this point, Primus had mastered the shape-shifting abilities he'd gained from the merger with Doughboy and adopted the appearance of his creator. He also used knowledge inherited from Zola to help Zemo mutate innocent people into monstrous forms. Notable among these victims was Edward Whalen, who was transformed into the rat-like Vermin, and later became a recurring foe for the spectacular Spider-Man. Primus also used his shape-shifting abilities as part of a scheme to ruin Captain America's reputation by impersonating his civilian identity, Steve Rogers. However, when Primus developed feelings for Rogers' girlfriend, Bernadette Rosenthal, he continued the masquerade without disrupting their relationship. Naturally, things culminated in a fight between Captain America and Primus, but when Bernadette intervened, the android began to question his priorities and his allegiances. Despite having Cap on the ropes, Primus abandoned the fight and departed by transforming into a rocket, declaring that he and Bernadette would meet again someday. Although, to my knowledge, such a reunion has yet to take place. Arnim Zola, of course, has returned a number of times over the years, but I'd say we've covered pretty much everything there is to know about his origins here. If you want to read something featuring him, then try checking out the 2013 Captain America story, Escape from Dimension Z. Also, be sure to let me know that you made it all the way to the end of the video by answering this question: who is your favorite Captain America villain? In the meantime, that is all I have for you this week, and thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in the video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. Let me give a special shout out to my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members, all of which help make the channel possible. By signing up for any amount on any of these platforms, you'll get your name in these special thanks, but Patreon is the one that does help determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. And of course, if there is anything in particular you want me to talk about, be sure to let me know in the comments. But that is indeed all I have for you this week, and until next time, true believers, Excelsior!